How is everybody doing today? Starting a little bit early, gonna hang out, wait for people to show up. We are gonna be talking all about getting started in 3D printing, because I know a lot of people might have gotten some 3D printers for the holidays, and I have what is likely to be the most popular printer next to me. It's hard to see. Should have thought and had further ancillary lighting. But no, this is an Ender 3v2 seated next to me. Victoria is gone. Her bed's down there for now. Wanted to make sure that we could have a talk with the printer here, so we kind of talk about some of the things that could go right, could go wrong, and yeah. Apparently there's no sound. Definitely should be sound. Let me verify we got sound. Okay, we got sound. All right. Let's wait for a little bit for people to get settled in here. How's everybody's holiday? I'd love to know down in those comments. Hey, Jimmy. It's weird that we're doing it on a Monday. We're actually doing this live Monday, December 27th. If you're listening audio only, of course, these will come out a week later, but not a full week this time. Didn't really want to do a stream on Christmas Day, which we normally stream on Saturdays, and I figured everyone's going to be traveling Sunday, so it really didn't make a lot of sense to do a stream that day either, so let's just do it at 2 p.m., one of our regular times, on Monday, instead of doing a channel video. But yes, your notifications are not wrong. We are actually streaming today. We're going to have some fun and talk all about it, because I think a lot of people are finding themselves being what the gaming community calls the Christmas noobs, and we want to work at solving that problem, because especially for printers like the Ender 3v2 here, regular Ender 3s, even machines like the Prusa Mini, you might have questions, and I want people to, I guess, be more comfortable with their machines and be more comfortable asking for help and understanding what that looks like. 'Cause I think really the big thing is, one, search before you ask, because likely somebody else has asked it before. But two, if you want to get like one-on-one assistance, just email us, youtube@3dmusketeers.com. How's it going, local maker Michigan, or am I? I assume Michigan. I'm assuming it's Michigan. But yeah, we're going to be talking all about some stuff here, and it'd be really cool if everybody in those comments would share some tips and tricks as well. And that way we can kind of crowdsource some tips or tricks. We will have a channel video coming out about this probably next week, like the second week of January. Going to be talking about this a little bit more in depth. So we're going to really look into this and make sure that we can provide kind of like a, hey, I just got a 3D printer, start freaking here kind of guide. Because I think a lot of us have learned the hard way that the internet is not always the best answer. Because you might know that you have an Ender 3, but if you don't know it's the V2, or the original, or the Pro, or anything like that, you're going to have a problem. Also, my video did freeze there. I'm sorry. You're going to have a big problem, and we don't want that to happen. So let's dive into it. Give me just a second. We're going to get a recording rolling here, and let's kind of hit the ground running right at 2 p.m. on the money. So you got yourself a 3D printer for the holidays. And I know a lot of people watching us live right now are probably like, no. And if they did, they probably have another one, or a 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 40th. I don't know. But chances are a lot of people that are finding this video or the podcast surrounding it will have just gotten a 3D printer for the holidays. And that can be a little daunting and a little troublesome. It doesn't have to be, though, right? Machines like the Ender 3v2 are not bad machines. I don't necessarily consider this a top-tier 3D printer either, but it's not a bad machine. I think it is more than adequate. Like we said in the original video where we talked about this, it's a great second machine. I don't really think it's a great machine to learn on unless you do have a ton of time. Like if you're, a younger kid, maybe early teens, that's got a lot of free time, especially right now during the holiday and winter break, it would be a great time to learn on an Ender 3. But if you are looking to get something where you can immediately start making money with it, Ender 3 may not be going all that well. I see Fotis Mint is in here. I want to give a big shout out to Fotis Mint as well for shaving his beard for charity. Breaks and Makes was doing a charity live stream for the Sanjay Foundation with E3D. And Fotis said for 300, I'll shave the beard. And Pooch ponied up the money. And Fotis shaved half the beard and posted a photo, which I think is truly the greatest Two-Face in the industry right now. So, Fotis, that would be funny for us to see some sort of like Two-Face sculpt this yourself. But if you guys don't know who Fotis Mint is, go follow them over on Patreon. They make absolutely amazing sculpts. One of our favorite artists. If you see our time lapses and everything, you know who Fotis is. Of course, we got Maker Viking, local maker Michigan here, Jimmy Johansson, and Jordan Stoev. Sure. But anyways, I want to get into talking about this from a technical standpoint, right? Let's start off with what the hell is a 3D printer? Because, hi, I might have just gotten a 3D printer and I don't know what the heck these things are. What is it? It's a computer-controlled hot glue gun. It is the easiest way to describe it. And how does that work, right? It's not that you say, printer, I request one item of this. Do it. It's unfortunately nothing like that. You actually have to do it the hard way and design everything yourself. So if you're not into design, we're going to do intros to design stuff here coming up in the new year. But if you're not into design, it is very, very good for you to start looking at the online repositories. Places like prusaprinters.org, probably my favorite model repository site at the moment. They just released a new gamification system that makes this so much better to actually utilize, right? You are motivated to go there, look for files, download stuff, post makes, and I think that's really, really cool. Hats off to the Prusa team for doing that. We've got, I would say Colts 3D, but there's been some BS surrounding them, so I'm not going to give them any credit right now. But let's see, we got My Mini Factory's pretty decent if you are into the tabletop gaming. We've got Turbo Squid, but sometimes Turbo Squid's kind of rough. There's Thangs 3D, or Thangs.com. Some people like Thangs, some people don't. I'm trying to get the head of Thangs at FISNA to do a podcast with us. So if we can get that, maybe then people can kind of air some of their questions and we can answer them live, which I think would be pretty damn cool. And of course, there is the dreaded Thingiverse. And Thingiverse is probably the oldest one. I think it is the oldest model repository, but it does have some of the highest controversy. They had a pretty significant data breach that took over a year to alert the general public of, and there was over 100,000 people's names and email addresses, of which I was in there. Like, my personal email and all of that was in that leak. And that sucks. That really sucks. But unfortunately, Thingiverse has been around so long that they're going to have the domain authority that places like Prusa Printers and Thangs and Colts and all of that don't exactly have. And I apologize, it looks like for some reason every now and then we are freezing. I don't know why. Let me know if the audio cuts out too during that time. I hope that it doesn't. Nothing's going on my computer side of things. We did recently upgrade, but everything seems to be fine, so sure. But anyways, when we look at repositories, understanding what you're downloading is important as well. Now, most more affordable printers are going to have you use Cura. And that is C-U-R-A. It is made by Ultimaker, and it is supported, and it's an Ultimaker thing. But similar to Prusa Slicer, my preferred version, it is not just for Ultimaker printers, and Prusa Slicer is not just for Prusa printers. Cura is a great software. We did a video on it. You guys can go find it on the channel. And it was a pretty decent video. Of course, Cura is rapidly changing, so it may not be all that relevant. And when Cura makes a big update, we will make sure to do a brand new variant of that. When we look at, ones like Idea Maker, Matter Control, Kirimoto, trying to think of the other ones that I've missed, Simplify 3D, Slick 3R, I don't know if I can recommend those immediately for a starter person, like someone that just started in the industry. I will say, a lot of the manufacturers are going to include a micro SD card or some sort of USB flash drive. Do not trust them. They're pretty much crap. The chances of these things failing is pretty high. And you don't want it to fail in the middle of a print. That's bad for business or bad for the hobby, because you will start to chase this dragon of why the hell did my prints fail, not understanding that it was nothing to do with you. It was a hardware thing because of your flash drive or your micro SD card. Micro SD cards are crazy cheap. Just go buy another one. Seriously, they're like less than $20 freaking dollars. Go buy another one. And I think that's one of the first big upgrades you can do on any machine. I don't care if it's a Prusa, although Prusas do have really good SD cards, and I have yet to had a Prusa one die on me. But for the price, they're dirt cheap. And there's no reason to trust something that could be a little bit janky. And you could even do one of your first prints be an SD card holder, where we hold all of our micro and full-size SD cards inside this container in crazy colored filament, because otherwise I will lose it. I shouldn't be immediately trusted to keep things handy. I'm really busy. But when we look at how to get the file from that repository to your printer, you got to use one of those slicers. Do not use the slicer that comes on your card, right? A lot of times Creality will include an older version of Cura on the micro SD card. Just download the latest version of Cura. Please, download the latest version of Cura. Download the latest version of Prusa Slicer and add your printer. A lot of times there will be pre-made profiles for your printer already inside of these two big slicers. And that way all you have to do is say, yep, I've got that printer, put all the settings in and make it happen. A lot of times the bone stock settings that will come to you from these from these slicers will be good enough. Not amazing, not terrible, but good enough, right? It's a good starting place for you to learn from. And even in Prusa Slicer, I firmly believe that Prusa Slicer runs printers at like half the speed they really can handle, and about a third of the speed they probably should. But I think that makes sense when you're dealing with machines that have some form of a wild card. Wild cards are machines that have to be built. So machines like the Ender 3v2 here, it needs to be assembled. And that means installing the Z-axis, doing this top bar, the filament holder, making sure that everything goes together correctly. If you don't have stuff tightened appropriately, you're going to have a printer that can't run as fast. Things are going to be a little bit loose. We actually were just talking with a client of ours who for some reason thinks that I make videos about them constantly. I don't. I'm sorry if you feel personally attacked. We have a good friend of ours who had some issues with their printers and found out that the grub screws had totally backed out from their extruders and that their V-wheels continue to loosen up. And that loosening of the V-wheels is incredibly important. If you're dealing with an Ender-style printer where you can actually see wheels on your axes themselves, hey, you've got a printer with V-wheels. And we talked about this, but I believe it's a 10mm wrench, it might be a 12, where you can utilize that and make these things tight. Understand, you don't want them to be too tight or too loose. The way that we've always done it is if I can hold the wheel and push the printer, and the printer does not move or moves with a ton of resistance, then that's fine. Now, if I let go of the wheel and I try to move the printer, it should move relatively smoothly. Now, if you are trying to do this and your printer is off and you see your screen flicker, stop. What you need to do is go ahead and plug your printer in and turn it on. What you are doing is you are backfeeding the motherboard with current from the stepper motors, which can potentially damage your printer. So if for some reason you're seeing it flash when it's off and you're moving axes, that is normal, but you don't want that to occur. Another thing to note, if you are going to run your printer via USB, if you forget to turn the printer on, USB can generally power the entire motherboard. It will not, however, move the stepper motors, or definitely won't heat the bed or the hot end. So if for some reason your printer isn't moving when you're sending it commands, chances are you might be running over USB and you forgot to turn the printer on. I've been there before, way back in the day, but I've been there before. I want people to look at it and say this is not a headache. And I know a lot of times 3D printing can be a headache. If you watch the Print Fail Friday series that we do here, you'll know it can be a bit of a headache sometimes. And that is not typical. Asterisk, kind of. It might be where you deal with a printer that is not well calibrated, something was assembled incorrectly, maybe the PTFE tube is not fully seated into the hot end. There are a lot of little things that can really upset you. And because there are so many things in the chain that can be the problem, solving that can be very, very complicated. And if you're new to this, not understanding it, which you likely don't, right? Unless you put a lot of time and effort into that research, you may not 100% understand what could or what is going on, right? If that occurs and you're like, Grant, I do not know what the hell I'm doing, I need help, email us, right? I'd much rather you email us. I mean, if you go onto our website, you can find our phone number and call us. But I'm available to help you guys out. This is what we want to do, right? I recognize this can be frustrating, and there's not always a perfect solution. We've actually found out that upwards of 10% of the Print Fail Fridays that we do, I get them wrong. Now, I'm putting it in the right order of try this, try this, try this, try this. And you have to go in order or you end up potentially having problems. Let me move the mic a little bit closer. You end up potentially having problems where the system fails you, or maybe you do one of those little tiny things wrong that then results in a much bigger problem. Yes, I hate to inform you that it is not as easy as plug it in, click print, and go. I will say the closest thing to plug it in, click print, and go is a Prusa, right? The auto bed leveling, the live adjust Z, the power panic solutions on the Mark III's, and even the filament runout sensors on both really do make those printers pretty much a plug and play. If you are interested in one, of course, there are affiliate links in that description, because this is a business. Like, don't hate me, it's a business. But we have this kind of divide. This is a video coming up in the first quarter of Ender 3 V2 versus Prusa Mini. Can I take the amount of money between a V2 and a Mini and make a V2 as good as a Mini? And that is going to include paying myself between $10 and $15 an hour. The video will have numbers for both. Because I don't know if it is. Now, it could be, right? Putting in a bed leveling probe is a nice upgrade. But I don't want you to come out of the gate with a brand new printer thinking, all I need to do is add $200 in upgrades and my $280 printer all of a sudden is going to print well. It may not, right? Let me grab a light here. Is that going to work well? Oh yeah, that works okay. So we look at the extruder here, and the thing that you notice is it's all completely covered. If the extruder is fully covered like this, it does make it a little bit complicated to work on. Understanding where all the screws are to remove this outer cage and when you should do this. Like, never remove the outer cage of this printer, or any printer for that matter, if the printer is turned on and or heated up. You can always turn off your printer when it's hot, and it still is hot, but it is off. We don't ever recommend turning off a printer when it is still warm. As long as it's under probably 75 or 80 degrees Celsius, you can go ahead and turn that thing off. But if you're still up in the 200s, don't turn it off. It will cause all the heat at the bottom of your nozzle to wick up into your heat sink and then get into your filament. Or if you're running a PTFE lined hot end, potentially damage that PTFE liner, resulting in printing problems. Now, unfortunately, a lot of these small little oopsies can result in major problems if they're not dealt with correctly. Things like cleaning your bed. If your bed has hand oil, grease, and even oil from lubricating things on it, stuff is not going to stick to it. And if you don't clean your bed before every print, or at least every once in a friggin' while, and you're having all of these issues with bed adhesion, and it might only be in small areas, or it could be the entire bed, you might get advice like, oh, you have wet filament, which I honestly believe is one of the most BS things in this industry. Like, if you're printing PETG and it's a little bit stringy, all right, that's probably wet filament. But if you're just starting out and you're using PLA, chances are you don't have wet filament. Now, if it sounds like a bowl of Rice Krispies, then it's probably wet filament, right? Where you have actual air bubbles popping because it's absorbed water. That is water. Like, that is absolutely wet filament. But if you're going online and looking for advice and someone says dry your filament, just, if you're new to this and it's a new roll of filament, ignore it. 9 times out of 10, ignore it. Now, if it's a nylon, if it's a, special material that is hygroscopic, right? Yes, hygroscopic. Hydrophobic rejects water. Hygroscopic absorbs it. But if it is something that is hygroscopic, yes, water intrusion is a problem. Things like PVA, which is soluble support material, are crazy, crazy sensitive to water intrusion. So, be careful about that stuff. But ultimately, if you're just running generic, run-of-the-mill PLA, chances are it's not wet filament. I would always, 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 always make sure that bed is clean. Because if that bed isn't clean, it's going to lead to other problems. Make sure the nozzle is clean. Make sure that literally the outside of the nozzle is clean. Little copper brushes or even brass brushes. Don't get the steel ones because that will damage the nozzle, but it has to be something that is brass or softer, are relatively cheap, and they're very common in the firearms industry. So if you look up like a firearms cleaning brush, you'll find them. They're pretty cheap. I think you can get like a 5-pack for $10, right? Those are great for cleaning little bits of filament that have stuck to the nozzle or the heat block. If you do have an instance where your nozzle is getting stuck, where filament is getting stuck to the heat block, chances are you don't have a sock on your hot end. That is an easy, cheap upgrade to do. Look for the type of printer that you have. So if this is an Ender 3, it's an Ender 3 sock, and you should be able to find them for relatively cheap, prime shipped on Amazon to get them to your door. Installing that on there will not only help you better keep the heat in, but it will help keep any things like filament sticking to it away. But those are upgrades, right? How do we keep filament sticking to it in the first place? Well, it starts by not running the printer too damn fast. If you run the printer too fast, you're going to have problems. Understanding where your hot end can meet is a very, very important thing. If you're running faster than your hot end can heat, you're going to have a problem. Now, programs like Prusa Slicer, and I would bet that Cura does this as well, have the ability to slow down the printer when it hits its volumetric flow rate. And if you're like, my printer won't print faster than 130 millimeters a second, well, that's probably because you're hitting the limit of the heater. There are 2 ways around this, and normally you do both of them. You increase the volumetric flow of your printer, and you increase the temperature. Because what's going to happen is that as you're trying to push filament through, you can't heat that filament completely and it's going to shrink a lot faster. Yes, even PLA can shrink a lot faster. But when we look at the slicers themselves, I know for a fact Prusa Slicer does this. Now, I am running Prusa Slicer 2.4 official release video coming Wednesday, all about this. And it does have settable volumetric flow rates, and it will slow down the printer. And I tried this. I tried setting our Big Fusion 3, which I know for a fact can run well over 300 millimeters a second if you turn the temp up high enough, at 300 millimeters per second, and it did not run it that fast. Because Prusa Slicer said, no, you can't print that fast. We're going to slow you down. And that's important. You want the slicer to help you where you can't help yourself. Let me get some water. If you are going through 1 million millimeters per second printer turned into dust, I've never seen a printer that can run 1 million millimeters per second, but I have seen printers that run easily 100,000 millimeters per second squared. It's an acceleration rate of 100,000. They run pure ball screws X, Y, and Z, because they have no backlash. There's no stretching of belts. There's no nothing like that. So it is possible to print fast like that, but you will likely end up needing something like a pellet extruder, or I'm sure it's possible from the kinematic standpoint, but you would need a big heater to do it. You would need a massive heater to do it. And don't sit there and say, can my Ender 3 print Ultem? 1, why do you want to print Ultem? 2, no, you can't. Not a stock Ender 3. A stock Prusa cannot print Ultem, technically. You can make them pretty easily, but they can't. So understanding the limitations of both your machine and your slicer are important. Both Cura and Prusa Slicer have certain modes, whether it's beginner, intermediate, or advanced. I think Cura calls advanced expert. Make sure you set it appropriately. Now, if you're finding that you're looking for other settings and you can't find them, go up a tier, right? Prusa Slicer really cuts away some of the meat and potatoes of the slicer itself on the beginner to make it as easy as possible. I normally recommend that at least for Prusa Slicer, you start immediately on the intermediate. I believe it's more indicative of what's common in the slicers, but if you find it daunting, start on the beginner. D. Perry says, I can't get bed adhesion on my Prusa Mini. I keep breaking the hold and losing my print. I am new to this. I have cleaned the bed with alcohol. Glue seems to make it worse. Correct. I recommend that you take your bed off and rinse it with water and dish soap, the hottest water you can handle. It will help get some of the oil off. If you're old enough and know vinyl records, hold it like you would a vinyl record. From the edges. Don't touch the bed itself. Also, make sure you go through that Live Z calibration on the Prusa Mini so you can make sure that you're squishing it in enough. If you're using the textured sheet instead of the smooth sheet, it will need to go in quite a bit further. Something like 0.6, I think, is common. But go ahead and run that first layer calibration to make sure that your first layer sticks. Also, this brings up a good point about speed. Your first layer should be relatively slow, 25 to 35 millimeters per second. Any faster, if you're new, might cause your parts to warp. Of course, there are ways to go much faster on your first layer once you get a little bit of experience under your belt, but again, I'd rather your prints take a little bit of extra time, and they come out better than you try to send it to the nines and to the moon, and you end up not getting stuff to stick. D. Perry says, thanks, man. Great stuff. My Z-axis is at like negative 0.9. Likely because it's a kit, every single one will be a little bit different. So telling me that it's at 0.9 is unfortunately a little bit irrelevant. We have 4 minis and none of them are all that close to each other. Now, I've gotten to a point where I can build them so they're like plus or minus 0.1 of each other for the Z offset, but that's just because I've built so many of them. I've just gotten, all right, I use this as my calibrator and it's close enough. But yeah, try out making sure that everything is clean. Cleanliness is important. Now, once you get your printer running reliably, okay, if you forget about cleanliness a little bit, it's probably going to be okay, right? A printer that's got bits of filament stuck in the rails and all that is probably not going to cause too many issues. But making sure you recognize if your printer has ball bearings or V-wheels will be incredibly important to keeping it alive and running well. V-wheels specifically need to make sure that the rails that the wheels run in, like up here, let me get a auxiliary light here. The wheels up here run on the top and bottom of that rail. If the wheels have crap in the way, whether that's a belt, printed parts, dust, dirt, debris, grime, good lord, Cheeto dust, I don't know and I don't really want to know. But if there is dust, dirt, debris, grime, muck, etc. in the way, you are going to either prematurely wear your V-wheels or potentially cause one to seize. Hilariously, I had this happen on my Fusion 3 the other day. We had just purged filament and I forgot to grab the piece that fell into the printer. And what happened was that long string of purge material actually got caught in the Z-axis belt and caused the entire Z-axis to get stuck. Now, because that machine has a triple lead screw Z-axis, everything got all off axis. It is pretty easy to fix, but it did take some time and a fair bit of frustration. But I knew what I was doing. I saw it occur. I heard it occur. I'm like, that's not a good sound. Hobbled my hurt ass over there. And the printer is actually above. Ow. God, that hurt. The printer's above me up there. So I had to actually like hobble up onto a stepladder, which now is covered in filament because holiday shipments. Let me know if you guys want to do more like these filament unboxing videos. I don't know how well they do, to be honest with you, but who knows. Anyways, making certain, yeah, right? Making certain that everything is clean. Cleanliness is next to godliness, I think is the saying. Maybe it's not. It doesn't really matter. Making sure everything is clean is important. Yes, once your printer is moving and grooving, it can get a little bit dirty, but understand V-wheels and ball bearings will eventually be wear items. V-wheels faster, right? Because as they pick up, especially like bits of sand and dirt that are gritty, that are harder than the wheel itself, they will embed themselves into the wheel, potentially leave scratches and all of that. That is all important. I also recommend that if you got an Ender 3, keep an eye out for an all-metal extruder upgrade. And an all-metal hot end upgrade, not immediately necessary for the hot end, but the extruder especially is very, very common to see them break. The plastic idler arm, now it's in the back here, I can't really show it on camera, but trust me, it's there. There's a plastic idler arm that you pull on to insert filament, right? It removes pressure from the system. Those over time can break because, oh yeah, they're made of cheap plastic. That cheap plastic doesn't always last all that long. And the metal extruder upgrades can be had for something like 10 bucks or less. And it's really cheap insurance to have around. So if you look and you see, oh, the idler arm broke, just replace it. It's easier. And if you utilize the exact same extruder gear or one that is the exact same size, you will not need to change your steps per millimeter. And that is important. Making sure your steps per millimeter are accurate is one of the next big things to do. Now, generally speaking, from the factory, it's good enough. But if you are really trying to tune a printer with a calibration cube, like a CHEP cube or something like that, it is very, very common that you might need to change some steps per millimeter. Apparently, according to Eclogites, sure, there are extra arms. That's kind of cool. Or they were able to print a spare one. I don't really think that plastic arms are the best material for your idler. I do believe metal is a better fit. Just because you don't want any play in the extruder system. Any play, backlash, or anything like that is going to cause problems for your printer. A great thing to do is also make sure that everything is tight. Be careful with the V-wheels. If you over-tighten them by that eccentric nut or even the actual bolts, you'll lock them and they won't be able to move. So make sure that your extrusions are tight, but I don't want to see you leaning into it with a cheater bar. If you don't know what a cheater bar is, it's like when you take a long ratchet and stick a pipe on the end of it to give you more mechanical advantage. Don't do that. Okay. Tight is good. Some manuals will give you torque specs, but it's aluminum. Okay. Don't over torque it. Don't go hard in the paint on this. You got to be careful. Chris Polk says, aside from setting up a lab grade clean room, any tips for air cleaning and and fume mitigation for FFF and FDM, namely ABS? No. One, don't print ABS, print ASA. So start with that. ABS is acrylite butadiene styrene, I think. ASA is acrolein styrene acrylite. They're still styrene based, but without the butylene, ASA is UV stable, which makes ASA a superior plastic. You can utilize carbon filters that will filter out the smell specifically, but it will not work on really nasty ABSs. Like we have a fire retardant ABS here that will not filter out the smell. So if you're using an FR ABS, go put it in a garage. Like that's the best advice I can give you because that's what I had to do. You don't have to set up a lab grade clean room with all that other stuff. A carbon filter should be reasonable enough, but if you're printing with ABS anyways, you should have a full enclosure on your printer. Mitigating drafts is a massive deal for any type of plastic. Now, PLA is not as bad as ABS. ABS is one of the worst offenders with nylon and polycarbonate up there too. But normally, PLA doesn't really care too much about drafts, but it can. So you do have to be careful about these things. Do understand that if it does smell and it smells bad, you've got a problem. You need to deal with this. If you're running an ABS printer and you're utilizing a fume extraction system, I don't care if it's something like a computer fan or it's something like an evacuation system for a greenhouse or grow house. That's what we use for our laser. It's actually pretty good. You will be pulling in cooler air, which will chill the printing volume, right? So unless you have an active heater with a carbon filter, you're going to have a problem. And if you're wondering, Grant, I can't get those. Hold on. I'm definitely not working on something like that now. I'll be coming out hopefully Q1 of 22. Most of my prints are indoor use, and ABS I can come by a lot cheaper than ASA. If you're not using plastics outdoors and you're not dealing with any high heat, there is no reason to be using ABS. ABS is an antiquated plastic. It is so antiquated, it's literally made of recycled dinosaurs. Liquefied recycled dinosaurs. Okay? It's oil-based. Where do we get oil? Dinosaurs. PLA is plant-based. It's corn, basically. It's polylactic acid. It is reasonably recyclable. I think PETG is more recyclable than PLA. And most places have systems in place for PET and PETG, where not every recycling facility will have solutions for PLA. So be careful about that. But if it is for indoor use, stop using ABS and move over to a much nicer and easier material to print with like PLA. And that brings up a good point. Cooling. On printers like the Ender 3, they only have a cooling duct on one side of the hot end, which means you don't get even cooling of your parts. It is highly recommended that you look at printing a brand new fan shroud, where you're able to put air all along the hot end. Now, it doesn't have to wrap completely around, but at least 180 degrees is useful so that you can see what the heck is going on and make sure that your prints are going to get adequate cooling. Some people choose to go up to the 5015 blower fans. Happen to have one handy here. These are very common in the 3D printing industry, both the Mini and the Prusa MK3S Plus both use these big fans, and they produce a ton of air, and they can work through a fair bit of ductwork. They don't produce a ton of static pressure, so be careful. But overall, they're really good fans, and I think I bought this pack of 5. There's only 3 left in here because we're doing product development. But I think I bought that pack of 5 for something like $12. So really cheap. Those are good to put, and you have to make sure that it is the correct voltage. So when you are removing your fan, check to see, is it 5 volts, 12 volts, 24 volts? What is it? You'll want to know so that when you order a new fan, you can get the right voltage. Now, putting a 24 volt fan on a 12 volt system is not inherently bad, but it will mean that the fan runs quite a bit slower than it should. Putting a 12 volt fan on a 24 volt system means you're probably going to kill the fan. Now, if you slowly ramp up the speed, you'll be able to tell pretty quickly, do you have the right fan? If you don't know the voltage of your fan, you can look online, or you can use a multimeter to check. If you don't have a multimeter, look online or give us a ring, and I'm happy to check myself and make sure, that someone else takes a look at it as well. But for materials like ABS, polycarbonate, nylon, ASA, and some of the higher temp stuff, you do not want to use your fan, and if you do, use it very sparingly. Materials like ABS and the others, when they cool, they shrink. And that shrinkage is a bit of a problem because it will create warping. And we don't want warping. That's actually pretty bad. What will occur is that the part will start to lift off of the build plate and create a big tangled mess of garbage. Now, if you do end up with that, hit us up, send it in for Print Fail Friday so we can take a look at it and talk about what went wrong. But that's also why if you're printing in some of those materials that like less cooling, you want to do it inside of an enclosure. Now, for the beginner out there, don't worry about this. Just buy PLA and you'll be just fine. Now, do understand PLA, at least here in Florida, will not last inside of a hot car. It will melt. Especially the darker colors, they'll absorb more heat energy quickly. Like coming back from Christmas with the family, I printed a big Christmas tree. My mom was like, "Why don't you have a Christmas tree?" It's because I have a cat. I said, wait a minute, I can have a Christmas tree. And I printed one, 32 inches tall and 16 inches in diameter, I think. So it was 400 by 800, I think is what it ended up being, or 775, something around those ranges. And I bring it to Christmas every year. It's like the one print that I only ever take out during Christmas. But that piece, because it's a lighter color, I can leave in my car and it's okay. But some of the larger parts that we've done that are hollow, that might be black or even a dark gray, can have major issues out in the sun. Running your fan at 20% for ABS might even be too high. We recommend for ABS to leave the fan off for at least the first 10 layers, preferably the first 15 or 20, so you can get a lot of that good heat. But as soon as you turn on the fan, you're pushing away heat, okay? So if you don't have an active heater inside of your chamber, you're going to have a problem. So be careful. It's why I don't like printing in ABS. And we have printers that are designed for it. I'll still print PET in them first. But PLA is still one of the easiest materials to use. Anybody in the industry will tell you that PLA is just really, really forgiving. It can be anywhere between 190 and like 225 degrees centigrade, and it's generally happy. It may not be 100% perfect, but it will run. Water. Sorry, one-person ones are tough because I got to take drinks in between. But PLA loves as much fan as you can get it. If you can give PLA 100% of fan all the time, post the first layer. First layer never has fans, but after that, give PLA as much cooling as you can do. If for some reason you're seeing that you're not getting enough cooling, put in a fan. Literally add in a fan. You can add in a desk fan. One of the little 5-volt desk fans are great for this, where you could put the cooling where you need it. If it's jank and it works, it's not jank. And remember, be certain that you're buying the right material. We have one person in the comments says they bought 2 kilos of ABS and thought it was PLA. I have definitely done this myself. I have definitely made this mistake, and I feel your pain, my brother. Is it more about temperature differential? as in an enclosure may allow fan use on higher temp materials because your temperature difference isn't as extreme as with fresh air coming in. Yes. So if your entire chamber is at 100 degrees centigrade and you turn on a fan, you're just moving around hot air. It's fine. Now, understand, if your printer is not fully sealed, that air movement will cause hot air to go out of the system. So I still say it's not worth it if you can avoid it. Now, ABS wants to print probably like a 65 to 80 degrees centigrade chamber, which can be tough for a lot of 3D printers to get to. And machines like, a CR10 or an Ender 3v2 are not designed to print ABS for a long time. Let's talk about the hot ends, because that's a good segue into talking about the hot ends. A stock Ender 3 CR10, stock Creality printer, generally speaking, has a PTFE lined hot end. That means it is only good at 260 degrees centigrade, and you really don't want to go above 250 if you can avoid it. ABS really likes to be relatively hot. You can print it as low as 230, but a lot of times I see better performance in the 250 to 260 range. So at those lower temperatures, you're really pretty much stuck with PLA and PETG, PETG being PETG. Those materials are both really good and will serve 99% of applications for the average 3D printer user. If you do have a bunch of ABS, have fun with it, but chances are you're going to have some warping problems, so be ready. But yes, it is all about temperature differentials. For PLA, the quicker you can cool it, the less likely it is to warp. And this is kind of weird. When you let PLA cool slowly, it has a tendency to warp. But when you let it cool very quickly, when you force it to cool down quickly, it is way more effective at cooling and keeping it from warping than it would be traditionally. This is something that is an issue on printers with chambers. If you have a chamber where you don't have any fresh air, PLA will actually not cool as well as you think it does because, again, it's all about the differentials. Differentials is what matters here. And I apologize again for the skipping. I do not know why OBS does this. I don't. It is not showing me that I'm dropping frames. OBS is literally saying, this is not okay. There is too much here. And I promise I've got plenty of GPU and plenty of CPU remaining. I actually have a very nice computer now. Finally did all the upgrades to it. But yeah, I believe that a good upgrade is an all-metal hot end as well. But if you are just running normal materials like PLA and PETG, run it as it's been brung, right? There's no reason, really, to change things until it's immediately necessary. Now, I will say going over to something like a Capricorn Bowden tube from the stock Bowden tube will improve performance, but I would do that when it comes time to change the liner, because the liner is the exact same as your Bowden tube here. Now, some printers aren't Bowden, like the MK3S is a direct drive 3D printer. That means that you don't really have a Bowden tube. Now, it does have a small one, but it is not a Bowden tube like you would see traditionally on something like an Ender 3 or a CR10 itself. Obviously, all this talk about cooling is freezing the frames. That's fair. It could be possible, or it could be OBS being OBS. I have a feeling it's OBS being OBS. But that is okay. Either way, Capricorn Bowden tube has a tighter internal diameter, and that means that it is less likely to cause you problems. Now, if you're using crappy filament, it might not go in as easily, whereas normal Bowden tube is somewhere between 2 and 2.2 millimeter interior diameter, where most filament is 1.75 millimeters in diameter. So if you're going to a 1.9 millimeter orifice, you're definitely lowering your extremes, right? So if your filament goes above 1.9, it's not going to go through that tube. Not without a lot of back pressure, that's likely going to cause a print failure. If it is below 1.75, it's not going to matter. It's just going to create potentially excess backlash. So be careful about that. But I would say if you are looking to do this long term and you don't mind doing an upgrade, an all metal hot end is a great upgrade. Now they are expensive, so if you got a birthday coming up, add that to the birthday list and let somebody else buy it for you and you do all the work to install it. We're going to be talking about that here relatively soon in a channel video, so get subscribed if you haven't, and hey, leave a like as well. It helps the channel grow. And if you do want to support us directly, you can do so at patreon.com/3dmusketeers. We have tiers starting as low as $1, and that does help the channel grow immensely because, well, it's not cheap to film video. It's something that I didn't really expect to have happen, but hey, here we are. And your assistance would be greatly appreciated in all of that. We will have channel memberships and all that coming soon for YouTube, and of course, super chats, stickers, and all of that are already available, so you can also donate directly during these live streams. Anyways, enough of the, he talks about, trying to get more money. Carlos asks, what have been your worst upgrades and installs? I haven't really had a bad upgrade, to say the least. I will say glass plates, although a lot of printers come with them right now, I don't think are great upgrades. If your bed is really warped, then a glass plate is kind of necessary, but I do believe that a flex plate is better than glass. They are much more forgiving, especially on parts that tend to be very sticky to that build surface itself. I don't think there's really such a thing as a bad upgrade as long as it's done with research behind it, right? If you think, oh, it could be my PTFE tube, buy Capricorn tube. If it wasn't your PTFE tube, you just put in better Capricorn tube. That's better, right? I mean, that's not a bad upgrade. Sure, technically it wasn't needed, but I don't find that to be a bad upgrade overall, right? Ultimately, I want to see systems where you're putting money toward a printer that needs it. Does an Ender 3 need upgrades? That depends on who you ask. Let me get into that right after a drink of water here. Does an Ender 3 need upgrades? No. Asterisk. It does not. We know a lot of people running absolutely stock Ender 3s with no problems at all. Hey, Carlos, thank you for $4.99. I appreciate it. He said, just wanted to get you a coffee. Here you go. I appreciate it. That's goes a long way to help us out. I got off track. Oh, what the hell was I going on? I think I was talking about hot ends, right? Crap. That took me completely off track. Someone tell me in the comments what I was talking about. I got off track. Jimmy says there are some bad upgrades. The fake ones, such as dampers for the stepper motors, which doesn't lessen the sound but increases the salmon skin thing. Rippling. Yes, we'll talk about that. We were actually talking about bone stock and whether or not the printer needs upgrades. I don't think it does, but I think quality of life starts to matter. If you are going to take this reasonably seriously, and I think if you are looking to get into this hobby, it is going to be something that you take reasonably seriously, right? Some of these upgrades are more for quality of life. Do I want to level my bed every single damn time that I want to do these? No, I don't. I don't. And so bed leveling probes like the TH3D probe, Tim Hoogland, great guy. I like him. He's been on streams with us before, only because I was struggling to work on a printer with his firmware on it, and we found a bug, which was pretty cool. He makes a really nice auto bed leveling system that uses a capacitive probe, which means it can work on glass, it can work on metal, it can work on basically any surface, and it doesn't need to be something specific. Print probes like the Pinda probe from Prusa need to have metal. They are inductive probes. We also have probes such as like a BL Touch. BL Touches are really affordable, like $15 for a clone, and the real ones are like $35 to $40. If you can afford a real one, support BL Touch where you can. For the Ender 3 V2, the Gyres firmware, we're going to do an entire video on making your Ender 3 better by just upgrading the firmware. Literally, the best upgrade for your Ender 3 is flashing firmware, and it's totally free. We're going to do a video on that coming soon. And that will enable BL Touch support. And a BL Touch is a quick 3D print for a mount for it, a little bit of wiring, and you're done. And you now have auto bed leveling enabled for your Ender 3 CR10 printer, yada, yada, yada. And I really like that. I like that you can add something for as low as $15, and it removes one of the most pain in the ass things about 3D printing, leveling plates. For years, we did not have auto bed leveling. It wasn't a thing. So we had to manually level the beds every damn time. And I will tell you, it sucks. I'm told that the Mr. MRISCOC firmware for Ender 3 is pretty good. We'll have to check that one out too. I know of Gyres. That's the one that most people recommend. But I heed the brand new guys. Do not play around with firmware until you are much, much more comfortable. Firmware is a great way to brick a printer. Don't do it. Until you really have some experience, don't do it. I don't want to see people get brand new printers and then brick them within, like, I don't know, a little bit. Ernesto Milan, thank you for the $10. God, you guys are great today. What advice would you give to someone starting a 3D printing / CAD design business? In your mind, what is the best 3D printer for the money? Ernesto, you are talking to a 3D printing and CAD business owner. This is literally what I do. I do 3D printing for a living. It is certainly not YouTube. I wish it was. It's not. But I wish it was. We love what we do. Prusa. If you want a set it and forget it, the Ron Popeil of 3D printer, as my buddy puts it, the Apple of 3D printer, it is a Prusa. And if you do want to get a Prusa, please use the affiliate links down in that description because it gives us a little bit of cash and it doesn't cost you a dime every time you buy one through our link. I don't believe Ender 3s are appropriate for businesses. I only own this Ender 3, one, because I bought it brand new on Amazon for $160 because of an Amazon Lightning deal and coupon stacking, and two, because of the YouTube channel. Otherwise, I would not own one of these. I have 12 Prusas among many other machines, and when I need to run a print, it's on the Prusas. I will say the biggest thing that I can go for on this, especially for you, Ernesto, is make sure you have a market. We find, and I find this myself, we don't need to have a niche. We can literally serve basically any market. There's no defined target market that we need to have. But as a business, you must define that target market, or you're going to end up trying to go after the Etsy people of the world. And let's be real, unless you're really willing to work for pennies on the dollar, you're not going to be able to compete with a lot of the people in Europe on Etsy, right? Where $1 an hour is sometimes, depending on where you live, a reasonably livable wage. It's not in most developed countries. Like, we don't charge that little. We are actually relatively expensive when it comes to 3D printing. But if you've already done your CAD with us, most likely you're going to do 3D printing. I will say make sure that you are proficient with your CAD software, or make sure you have engineers on staff that can assist you with it. I was not proficient when we first started, and so we hired engineers. Now I'm much more proficient, and I still have those engineers because they're pretty great. Chris Polks asks, do you think the Prusa Mini is capable of continuous production compared to the GOAT Mark III's? No. I don't. And it's not designed to. The Prusa Mini, to me, is a great printer that I can run, longer prints on, but I've never ran a really, really, really long printer on a Prusa, on a Mini. I've ran 5-day prints on my Mark III's without any issues at all. Totally fine. And I will trust the Mark III's. The Mini, because it's cantilevered, it's built to a price point, okay? It's not a bad printer, but they're built to a price point. I think that if you go slower, yes, absolutely, they'll run production all day. But the Mark III's, even though it is double the price, can print a lot of times close to double the speed much more reliably. And I think that's valuable when you look at a business. Now, for whatever it might be worth, they take up roughly the exact same space on a 6-foot long shelf. What you're looking at behind me are industrial racks from Sam's Club. They're 6-foot by 6-foot shelves, basically. They say they're 77, but they're 77 from end of bar to end of bar. The actual workable space is only 72 inches. You can only fit 4 Prusa printers on that. It'll only fit 4 Prusa minis. It'll only fit 4 Mark III's. You cannot fit more than that. It just doesn't. The mini is not much smaller than a Mark III's in width. So for me, I bought Mark III's. We bought a bunch of minis, and I love them. The mini is my go-to printer when I go to client meetings and that kind of thing, because it's got a handle. I can slap that bad boy on the table, load filament, click print, and because it's cantilevered, you can really get in there and look at it and watch it work. And it looks a lot cooler to me when it's running than a Mark III's. So like from a wow factor when I'm going to client meetings, I'm going to bring the mini. Also, I can't easily lift a Mark III's. I can easily lift a mini. I have a bad back, so I'm kind of limited in what I'm able to lift. But yeah, Ernesto, I would absolutely be looking at the Mark III's. If you want to start small, you can look at a mini, but very quickly look at upgrading to the Mark III's. Now, we do know the Mark III's platform is getting a little old and tired. So I might recommend currently to get a mini, knowing that there will be some sort of new Prusa printer coming out, hopefully in the next 6 to 8 months. Of course, the XL is released and they're taking the $200 pre-orders. I don't think that's a great printer to start with. I think at $3,500 or the $2,000 for the single head. Don't get the single head if you're a business. Get the 5 head. Come on. But I don't think at that price point it's valuable for a small business starting out. I think a mini goes a lot further to paying itself back very quickly. So I don't know. Word to the wise there. I can talk about that all day. I'm hoping to actually get Pooch over from Repcord, Alan Puccinelli, to come on and hang out in, I'm trying for next weekend, but we'll see. But definitely in a future episode of the Making Awesome podcast, talk all about what it takes to run a 3D printing business and how to properly price your damn products. Because I'm tired of seeing people sell things on Etsy for what is basically $5 above cost. You're not valuing your time. Just gonna put that out there. Make sure you price accordingly. Don't try to be the cheapest person on the block. All right? You are not trying to be the cheapest person on the block. Stop competing on price. We have Prusas, and I recommend them because Prusa refuses to play with price. Now, I think the Mini, they took some, corners, but I think they looked at, do we really need a dual Z-axis? No. Do we really need 2 towers? Well, no. If we make the printer small enough, we don't need the 2 towers. Oh, okay. Ernesto's asking a question that I can actually answer easily because, oh yeah, I have a Fusion 3 F410. I have one Fusion 3 F410. The big reason that I have it is I want to do big parts. I will say up front, I am a reseller for Fusion 3, so I do make a commission on those sales as well. So if you do want to get one, let me know. But honestly, I would take a bunch of Mark III's. I would. What is it? Those are $5,000 right now. So I could get 5 pre-built Mark III's, although I would do probably 5 kits and have some leftover money for materials. The kits are way more fun, and it's a great way to learn the machines. I always buy kits. I think that having multiple printers is more valuable. I think that the big Bowden system on the Fusion 3 is not the greatest. I absolutely struggle with it sometimes. It gives me a lot of crap. And the Volcano, it's not bad, but it's not great if you're doing low-temp materials like PLA and PETG. If you're printing primarily carbon fiber nylons and all of that, yeah, the Fusion 3 might make more sense because it is fully enclosed, it's 90 pounds, it's got a 2-year unconditional warranty and all those things. But if I was starting out as a small business, I would go for more printers and then look at getting something like an XL or a Fusion 3 down the line when the need for parts that big arises. Now, the cool thing is you can just outsource those builds that would not fit on a Mark 3S to somebody like us. We do outsourcing, or I guess companies outsource to us all the time, so that we can easily help them out when they're too busy, right? We have 33 printers. I don't have 33 printers worth of work, right? We have extra printers just in case shit goes wrong, because guess what? Shit goes wrong sometimes. I will say I like our Fusion 3, but it does give me a lot of grief sometimes, and it's very loud. It's much louder than a Prusa. So if you're doing it out of your house, noise is a big concern. Hilariously, this Ender 3 is like the quietest printer I own. The silent boards in these things are stupid quiet, and V-wheels are quieter than ball bearings. So something to keep in mind there too. I don't think the noise of a Prusa is too much for a home environment. I actually quite like it. It's kind of soothing to me over time. But you can also run the Prusas in silent mode. I don't. One thing to note, if you do have multiple printers that do have crash detection, turn it off if they're all on the same shelf, because chances are they might hit a resonance and cause them all to think they just crashed. Ask me how I've learned that. And a lot of times during the recovery process from crashing, they don't always perfectly go back to where they should. So, problems there. But yeah, I would go with more printers, because more hands make less work. And, actually, this should be tomorrow's time lapse. Yeah, we'll make it tomorrow's time lapse. We finished up an architecture job for a local client. 300 hours of printing in less than 3 days. Actually, it was more like a day and a half, really. But I think it was like 48 hours since they put in the order to when they got the parts. Something like that. But it was 300 hours of printing, because I put it on every single Prusa Mark 3S in the shop. And that is incredibly valuable. You can charge a very high rush fee for something like that. Now, I never worked with that client before, so I said, I'm going to go ahead and remove their rush fee, because I'd rather get extra work. I could have charged 10 grand and they probably would have taken it. But ultimately, it made more sense for us to charge a more reasonable price and potentially get more future work, rather than make them feel like they've got a gun to their head and no other way to get this thing done to potentially win a big bid. It makes more sense to build relationships that make for longer parts in the future than it does to do one-time things. Now, I will say, the guy made an offhanded comment. This is a big thing for business. The guy made an offhanded comment that his son thought that he saw a Darth Vader in the background of some of the pictures. He didn't. It was actually the heat sink to a printer, but I remembered that. And so for Christmas, I sent him a couple of Darth Vader prints. We actually time-lapse those. They're on our channel. So if you guys want to see that, that was actually a gift that I sent to a client. And that kind of thing really builds rapport. Rapport building for a business is the most important thing that you can do. And if you're getting a brand new printer and you want to start a business, answer your damn phone. Holy shit. You would not believe how many times we get phone calls. Like, you're the first person to answer the phone. I'm like, it's not that difficult. Answer the damn phone. If you don't answer your phone, you're letting go of money. It's flying out the window. Now, I will tell you, if you're local, never answer your phone, because I'll answer mine and I'll take the business from you. But yes, the big thing I will say about 3D printing businesses is that, tell us how you really feel, RE phones. Android for the win. That's all I got to say, Quilon. I will say this business is cyclical, so make sure that you've got supplementary income or very, very low overhead. Don't do what we do and start in a retail environment. That was a very bad move. I don't recommend it. But if you are just starting, look, printing parts for friends is totally cool. Make sure you're following license guides, okay? Don't go and back Fotis Mint for, a $5 or $10 tier and then go sell his stuff. You can't do that. You don't have licensing to do that. If you're looking at selling something with a non-commercial license, reach out to the creator and see if you can negotiate a commercial license for it. That is important because ultimately you need to gain trust. And if you are stealing, because remember that's basically stealing, okay? Don't steal from people. Make sure you're doing things above board. If you can do the design work yourself, and I highly recommend if you're brand new to this, start in Tinkercad. It's free, it's browser-based, and it is so simple. I have taught it to children. Follow the tutorials. It's made by Autodesk. It's very, very easy to use. I call it basically Minecraft for 3D printing. You build very similarly to how you would in Minecraft, and you can download the files and print them out immediately. And for what it is, it's pretty powerful. If you want to go do a real CAD program, Onshape or Fusion 360 would be my choices. They are relatively good to use. Onshape is odd because they do, in their terms of service, they do take a license of all the work that you do. So be careful about that if you're trying to patent something. But yeah, I mean, it really all matters. And I think Chris Polk makes a great question there. He said, at Ernesto, are you doing engineering plastics and one-off prototypes or production runs? If you're doing engineering plastics like nylons, it is better potentially to get something like a Fusion 3 over Prusas, because Prusas really do need to be enclosed. Bed slingers do not make for good nylon printers. But if you're doing one-off prototypes and small stuff, or even small production runs, a Prusa or multiple Prusas are great options for that. Other things to note here: belts. Belts, 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 belts. It is kind of the bane of 3D printer existence. It can be complicated. I think that is a bot. Just going to remove that just in case. Hold on. Belts, if they're too tight, will snap and they'll stretch a lot sooner. If they're too loose, they might skip over the pulley itself and create problems. You need to be careful about that stuff. You want the belt to twang a little bit. So let me see if I can get this to pick up on the microphone. Yeah, it does. It's got a little bit of a twang to it. I think it's a G, maybe. There's actually, like, you can use guitar tuners to tune in your belts, but machines like Prusas tell you if your belt is too loose or too tight. On an Ender 3, make sure it's reasonably tight, but you want to be able to move it around a little bit without it, like, really causing problems. Just be careful about that. Ernesto says both, that they just started. Start with one-off stuff. You might find yourself doing production runs. But engineering plastics, start with a Prusa there and go big when you need to. Yeah. Anyways. Oh, okay. Jimmy says, I think it's an E. I don't know how to play guitar. I don't know what they sound like, but we're going to go with an E string instead. On an Ender 3v2, they've got these blue knobs. Grant, find the knob. The knob is right here on the side. This will tighten or loosen your belts. On a normal Ender 3, you have to, like, do it all manually. It's a real pain in the ass. This is actually a great implemented system, and there's one on the front here too. I think this is a great system. Really, really well built. It's reasonably robust, and it seems to be something that is strong. So I like all of those things. Those are convenient. But yeah, make sure the belts are tight, but not over tight. If you can hold the motor pulley and move the belt, and it just, like, pops around, it's too loose. Chris.45 says Spectroid is a great audio frequency analyzer from the Google Play Store. It also is good for tuning FEP on a resin printer. That is correct. We're not going to get into resin printing today. I think I've kind of beaten that horse enough on podcasts of just, please, dear God, don't drink the forbidden milkshake. But, you know, otherwise, yeah, we're going to talk more about FDM. Other things to note. If you do go... Chep did a video. Okay, so Eclogite says, Chep did a video on the belts and it didn't really make a difference if the belt was too tight. This is true. But what it will do is it will cause excess wear on the bearing surfaces. So the bearing of your stepper motor and the bearings of the pulley are going to get pulled and stressed more, which can, especially over time, create damage in the system itself. So while it doesn't create any issues with the print, it will eventually create mechanical issues that, to me, way more complicated. Yeah, so just be careful. It will eat bearings. And if you don't have bearings on your pulley side, you've got a problem. Let's see what else we got on here. Bed leveling. If you do put an auto bed leveling system on your printer, remove the springs. A lot of people will put silicone spacers on the bed, and that will keep it from moving. That is my preference as well. You really want to make certain that the bed no longer moves. If you apply excess pressure to the bed and the springs are still there, you're going to mess with the bed level, which could be outside of the fixable range by the BL Touch, TH3D probe, whatever it might be. So be careful there. Other things to note. Oh, Jimmy brought this up earlier. The motor isolators, they're like little rubber isolators for your motors that are supposed to make your printer quieter. While they will make your printer quieter, they can introduce wiggle into the actual like motion system and will get you the scalloping or ghosting that is very common. Rigid mounting is better. It might be a little bit louder, but if you're that concerned about noise, just outsource your printing to somebody else, and then the prints just show up at your door with no noise necessary. And yes, it does cost extra, but if really noise is that big of a deal, make sure you do it right, I think, personally. Now, for printers like these are pretty damn quiet to begin with, but a concrete paving stone, I think like the 20-inch ones are enough. If you set it on, that will help decouple it from the surface that it's sitting on and will transfer a lot less noise and vibrations. Since we've got multiple Prusas, we're probably going to do it with a Prusa, and I'm going to show a side-by-side video of what it's like to have a printer on the table and then on the concrete block. Maybe just one printer, because then there's less things involved. And I agree with Jimmy, the tests that we've all seen don't really show that it's any quieter with those motor isolators. I think they're crappy, honestly, to be frank with you guys. But yeah, I don't think... Oh, cable management. That's, I was going to brush right over that. Cable management's a big... Waiting for the video to come back. Cable management's a big deal right after I get a drink. Not all printers have good cable management. Cable management is a big freaking deal. The Taz 6 has one of the poorest cable management systems I've seen in a long time. The cable comes down from the top. The problem is it's not supported any other way. So if you do a tall print, the cabling for the extruder can run into your print, causing it to fail. I don't have it handy. It's too far away for me to get, but I have a big print that failed that way. And I lost like a 33-hour print 2 hours before it finished because of that stupid problem. Really pisses me off. On something like an Ender 3 V2, it's gotten a lot better. Their cable management is a lot better. But on machines that aren't this or clones of these, it may not be as good. So make sure that your cables are kept out of the way, that they have sufficient slack to move all the way across the build plate. You see, we still have sufficient slack, that you don't have in your Bowden tube any sharp angles, because that's really going to upset things. And on your bed cable specifically, make sure... I hit it again. Dang it. Gosh. Who put that there? It was me. That especially on your bed cable, because there's a lot of power going through that bed cable. Make sure it's not crimped in any way, that it's got adequate strain relief. They have these plastic strain relief pieces on there. Check to make sure your printer has it. But I think really one of the biggest things that you should check for is make sure your printer has thermal runaway. The easiest way to check this is to remove the thermistor when it's heating up. So pull off the cover, and we've shown this in videos before. Make sure you are comfortable doing this. If you're not comfortable doing this, do not print unattended. But if you are comfortable doing this, pull off the front cover, remove the thermistor, and then tell the printer to heat up. The thermistor is not going to notice a temperature increase, and the printer will eventually, hopefully, go into thermal runaway and turn itself off. If it does not do this within 2 minutes, get rid of it. It's a hazard. You should not have it in your house, your business, anything. It is dangerous. Do not do that. Now understand, in 2 minutes, your printer can get well over 300 degrees centigrade, especially a hot end with a teeny tiny little cartridge heater. Like seriously, I've got one handy. This is a 30-watt cartridge heater. That little silver thing is a cartridge heater that can produce over 30 watts of power. And if you're like, oh, well, that's not a big deal, go ahead and grab a 30-watt light bulb and tell me how it feels. Yeah, it doesn't feel all that good. This is one of my really nice old school E3D 12-volt heaters that we're using for a project. But yeah, if it lasts over 2 minutes without going into thermal runaway, you've got yourself a problem. Queen Lon says 300C. Holy moly. Oh, Queen Lon. Yeah, it gets way hotter than that. Some high-end materials like Ultem print it over 400 degrees centigrade. Print over 400. Most normal plastics print somewhere in the 200 to 270 C range. But yeah, guys, I think that's really about it. It kind of covers the getting started with 3D printing. We tangented a little bit, but you know, that's pretty standard here. I want to thank everybody for coming out and hanging out with us. Again, feel free to leave comments. I always check these comments. Don't forget, if you want to support the channel directly, you can do so at patreon.com/3dmusketeers. Jimmy says, but if I have a Revo, do I need to worry? The answer is no. And Jimmy, I got a box today with some E3D tape on it, and you know what that means. We're going to be doing an unboxing of that will probably come out in the next couple of days. I don't know, maybe next week. But I got a box from the UK, and I'm very happy about it. But yeah, Revo, you don't need to worry about thermal runaway because it has a PTC in it. But let's be real, a Revo costs like half the price of an Ender 3 V2. At least, you know, kitted out. So you're probably not going to put a Revo on an Ender 3 V2. Straight up. But if you do, yes, you don't need to worry about thermal runaway. It has a PTC. It will only go to a certain point. But yeah, I guess this is the last podcast of the new year. Happy New Year to everybody. I appreciate y'all coming out and hanging out. If you guys have any further questions, comments, whatever, leave them in the comments, and I'll be sure to reply to you. But thank you all so much for hanging out and watching. Thank you to those that donated. I want to give a massive shout out to Ernesto and Carlos. Thank you guys both for your super chats. They are greatly appreciated. I wish you guys very happy holidays and a happy new year, but stay safe out there. Don't forget to call your loved ones, especially right now. And as always, keep making awesome. Have a good one.